Hi, it's Paul Banis with GreatDad.com, and thank you very much for joining either the podcast or the YouTube version of the podcast. I'd really appreciate it if you took just a second to subscribe either on your podcast app or in YouTube. It doesn't really do anything. It's not going to send you any emails. It's just going to show up more often on your feed, and it does me a lot of good in terms of getting more exposure for this work I do to support dads. I'd also like to invite you to come to my page, GreatDad.com/go, if you'd like to discuss more about any of the issues that we are covering within the podcast, especially if there's any way I can help you to be a sounding board in your own struggles to be a dad and to be there for your family. So take a look at that. It also includes a link to my course on gratitude, where at GreatDad.com/gratitude with a offer to take that course for free. So see you in a second. Hey, it's Paul Banis with GreatDad.com again, here with my weekly series talking about modern fatherhood. And an interesting topic today is sports. I think we've done a few of these in the last couple of weeks. Maybe very topical because of the Super Bowl just went on, but just because it's part of kids' life, such a big part of kids' life. So welcome, Michael Huber, to our show today.
Paul, thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here.
Yeah, I'm excited to talk to you because I don't think I've ever had anybody talking about this subject who's got this another angle on mental fitness and performance and the emotional development of kids in this area. It's usually more about the nuts and bolts of coaching. And you're a certified mental performance coach or consultant. I guess if you live in New Jersey, that's a status they have for you. But you have maybe a deeper look at how parents, kids, schools all function together in this ecosystem rather than just on one specific sport. Would that
Yeah,
be true?
that's a great way to put it, right? Holistically, they're all part of the same ecosystem, and I'd like to think that the work that I do needs to take into account all of that. Is sometimes it becomes siloed or fragmented just because the relationship that I have as a coach is with the family, right? The parent and the athlete. And sometimes I don't get access to a coach or I don't get access to some other element or variable in the environment. So I have to kind of do my best to rely on the clients to sort of give me the information. But in a perfect world, yeah, it would be all those factors and really trying to understand it, navigate it, and then help those people sort of be better in what they're doing in terms of the way they handle things.
And do you coach individual kids or families, or also organizations, and on that level?
Yeah, so I've done mostly individual coaching, and I think there's a reason why, and so I'll get to that in a second. But I think there are also opportunities to coach groups. I've coached groups at the college level. I've coached at the high school level. I've coached like coaches, like I've done seminars for
Yep.
coaches about how they can use this material, this information, these strategies to help coach their athletes better and understand them better. But I think with mental performance coaching, whether for right or wrong in the world we live in, there's still like mental health or therapy or anything like that. I think there's still a little bit of a reluctance to sort of make it public that people are accessing the resource, even though it's in the context of sport, even if it's becoming way more acceptable. There's still this element of anonymity that people want, right? They don't necessarily want their neighbor or their coach or their teammate to know that they're working on this kind of stuff because it has a connotation of like, hey, I'm not mentally tough, or hey, I'm lacking in confidence, or something's wrong that needs to be addressed. And then it becomes something that becomes a weapon and used against them. So a lot of times it's confidential and I'm bound by that confidentiality. So, but at the same time, there are limitations in terms of doing that work in a vacuum because you're just kind of doing it like one to one versus, hey, there's all this other stuff going on and you're not always
Yeah.
a part of it as a coach.
Yeah, so maybe we should specify here that you're not actually a psychologist, but you are working
Yeah.
on this emotional part of I guess emotional and what's the other part? Emotional and
Mental.
confidence part,
Yeah.
emotional and mental part of the coaching and the performance game, not or I don't know if is are skills at all part of that, or is it really the emotional
Yeah, so
Resilience part.
that it's a really good question. So I think first and foremost, like my training's in sports psychology. So
Mhm.
I'm trained in a lot of the things that a psychologist might learn about, like things like counseling skills and things like psychopathology, meaning like I'm trained to identify like bigger global general issues about general anxiety or general
Right.
depression, or are there sort of disorders and there's potential harm in there. I just can't treat it.
Right.
Right.
Right. Right.
So the skills are mental and emotional skills a lot of the time, which is like, how do I talk to myself? What's my self-talk? Can I visualize or can I imagine myself using imagery, in a situation where maybe I couldn't, like, I don't see myself there now. Um, all these different tactics and strategies that we apply. But then there's an element of coaching in the sense that, like, I am a former athlete, I'm a former coach, I understand the sport. So
Mhm.
then there's like this element of application, right? If I feel like if I teach an athlete these skills in a vacuum and I'm not able to help them with the application of it in their real environment in terms of how they do it versus like, here's the information, go figure it out, then there's going to be a gap too. Cause especially with young people, right? Like sometimes it happens with them where whether they're in a classroom or with a teacher, with a coach, they're hearing things and they're giving them information, but they don't know how the people who are giving the information, like a teacher or a coach, don't actually show them how to use it in that environment and take them through the learning process all the way. That's what I'm trying to do as best I can, within the limitations that I have as an individual coach.
So do you think, I mean, certainly back in my day, coaching high school sports, there were good coaches, but I think there were probably maybe more coaches who were just only focused on the game. They didn't really care about the emotional life of the kids they worked with. Maybe they thought a lot of them were their own kids and they treated them with a lot of love and
Yeah.
stuff. But there was still a lot of like, no, the only thing here is winning. Do you think that's evolved over time, that there are more compassionate coaches who are thinking more holistically about the life of the student than before? Or maybe I've got it wrong. Maybe that's just my experience growing up in.
No, I think you kind of nailed it. I think that a lot of the coaches, and there's a generational issue, right? Where some of the older
Mm,
coaches that were like maybe our age or older, like they were coached a certain way, just like I was
mhm.
coached a
Yeah.
certain way. And so most coaches learn how to coach from the people who coached them. And especially when it works, right? When you perceive it to have worked for you, that
Yeah, that's true.
coaching, you're going to, well, it worked for me, then it's going to work for these kids. And I think what we're starting to see is generationally, the current generation that I'm working with, Gen Z, the teenagers and like early adults, like they don't respond to that type of coaching. They want to understand why someone's asking them to do what they're asking them to do. And they want to understand how it's going to benefit them. And they want to have a voice and they want to speak up. They don't want to feel like they're just being told what to do. They want to feel like they have some autonomy in the process. So I think what's happening with like sort of some of the coaches is they are becoming more aware because, and in some ways, like mental health and mental wellness and that kind of stuff is very much, omnipresent and it's in their face.
Yeah.
They're aware of it and they maybe even understand it and they try. Right.
Yeah.
I think the hard part is in the application of it as a coach, right? When you get into those stressful situations where the team is not winning and Johnny or Mary is not playing well, that ability to be empathetic, to communicate, to take a deep breath, to like understand where the kid's coming from, why they're struggling, how can I help them versus I'm mad, you're not doing what I want you to do, go sit on the bench and I yell and scream at you. We're human as adults. I'm a parent. So like we all go
Right.
through that, right? As a parent, I go through that. Like, hey, sometimes my kids do stuff that I don't like and I react to it. Right. But then there's this whole sort of element of, okay, well, how do we deal with the person? Right. Do I apologize as an adult, as a coach? If I treat my player poorly and I react in a situation, I snap and I berate them and I call them names and I do all this stuff, do I have the wherewithal to go up to them after the fact and say, not even privately, hey, I'm sorry, I was wrong. I handled it the wrong way. Like
Yeah.
I should have done this. What can I do to help going forward? Right. I think those are the kinds of, for lack of a way to put it, like counseling skills that I think coaches are not even asked to learn. They're coaching, to your point, X's and O's. I'm coaching a
Yeah.
game. I'm coaching X's and O's, but the coaching the people part tends to be a struggle sometimes, just because they're not trained to do that. They're paid to coach the sport. And then that you get to that human level and there's all these emotions and all this interaction and stuff. It's not that cut and dry. And it can be really hard. And plus, when I talk to kids, I don't mean to ramble on here, Paul, but what I talk to kids about as well is that empathy side. Hey, listen, you're not the only kid,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
There are 10, 15, 30 of you that your coach has to interact with. And there are 60 parents that they have to interact with. And there's administration and there's all these responsibilities. You might not always get what you need as an individual. And so some of that responsibility falls on you to try to understand that and also advocate for yourself if you're not getting what you need, and not putting all the burden on the coach or the adult and saying, well, I'm not getting what I need from them, so like it's their fault. That's not really the way the world works either. So I try to really balance it and like have empathy for the coaches to say their job's really hard and like you got to take some of that responsibility too, which is, I don't think it's uncommon necessarily, but I think it's a little more of a struggle for an undeveloped teenage brain to sort of get the hold of.
Yeah, that's a lot of expectation for the kid to be the grown up in those situations. Instead of saying, "Oh,
Yes.
I can be empathetic to the coach. He's got a lot of going on, and I know he yelled at me, and but I can let it roll off my back." Though that is an incredible resilient skill if you are working with a kid and going through that, and you can impart upon them the value of seeing that and recognizing the fact that it's not about necessarily about you, and that the other person.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean that's
Yeah. If nothing else, right, in those
right.
moments,
Yeah.
you are not, you're not going to maybe react as emotionally, right? And you're absolutely right. There's a practical element to this, right? Like I think when I would talk to a client of mine, if you were my client, we talked about empathy. I think intellectually, it makes a lot of sense, especially for the older teens who are more developed, cognitively, emotionally. And then they get into the situation and then it becomes overwhelming. It's like, well, I know I understand this intellectually, but now I have to go knock on my coach's door and have a conversation. Like that's not as easy. And so, like, what I try to do with them in those situations is either saying, hey, if you're not ready for this, you don't have to do it. But if you want to do it, here's what we can do to prepare for it. Right. If you want to go talk to a coach about something you're struggling with,
Right.
let's talk about what that conversation can and should sound like so that you feel confident in your ability to have it, and knowing that you don't know how your coach is going to respond, but you're still willing to take that risk and speak up for yourself, because you know the anxiety that comes with not knowing for a lot of these kids is what really drives the bus. Is like, I don't know where I stand, I don't know what my coach thinks of me, and they're in their head, and then they're just constantly like worried about like what's coming next, and that takes away from their ability to not only perform but also just to function in life, because sport's such a big part of who they are.
Yeah, yeah. Well, but is that hierarchy kind of I feel like it's kind of breaking down a lot. I mean, back in the day, you were scared to death of the
Mm-hmm.
teacher. I mean, usually you weren't yelling back at a coach or a teacher or misbehaving in any way that would get you into
Yes.
trouble. And it seems like now people, that there are a lot of kids who maybe are on the other end of the spectrum. They're not afraid to like strike back and act
Sure.
up, and that gets them into a different type of trouble, right?
Yeah, I listen. I think you're right. I think we are getting to a place where young people are much more comfortable being heard, right? Where they
Right.
used to say children should be seen and not heard. I think that is changing quite a bit. But I still think the vast majority of young people are still kind of reluctant to have those kinds of conversations. I do think what's changed a lot from when I was a young person and maybe you were is the parents are a lot of times filling that void of being the voice of speaking up for the young person and calling a coach or talking to a coach. And I think that's also a dynamic that has a lot of impact on the way these things shake out, because the coaches are frustrated, like, hey, I'm trying to coach the kid.
Right.
Mom and dad here are trying to manipulate the situation, not in a bad way. They're trying to influence it to get the best outcome for their child and have their child be happy, safe, et cetera, get the opportunities that they feel like they deserve. But then it's like, well, now the coaches are resentful, right? So it becomes this dynamic where the parents are injected. So it's all very complicated, especially when you go back to the idea of, like you said early on, when we started, sports are really a big deal now. They're really important, and they end up being such a big part of the family's identity, not even just the young person, the family's identity, that the idea that people need to be successful in sport, it just feel like it just gets bigger and bigger every year.
Well, how much has that changed? I mean, you hear anecdotally about helicopter parenting, and whenever somebody talks about it, you recognize what that is. But I don't know anybody who, you hear these things like parents actually going to job interviews with their kids and trying to,
Sure.
be still parent on into the 20s. But and places where sports are that large, is that everywhere? I mean, I know it's true in Texas, but is it true? Is that like everywhere sports dominates in terms of that importance in school and everything?
Um, that's a good question. I mean, I tend to do a lot of my work.
You work with these mostly these people who are whose
Yeah. Well,
sports
so
are life.
I'll just share like I live in New Jersey. I live in Metro New York. So like I kind of get that's like a large
Yeah,
portion of my clientele and the nature of the place that we live, right? Whether it's high, fast pace, high intensity,
yeah,
people are very, very competitive. Those are all stereotypes or generalizations, but I think in a lot of senses they're true. There is this just competitive element where it feels like we got to get ahead. We got to get ahead. We've got to do what, our neighbors are doing. We got to do what our friends are doing because we're going to get left behind is sort of a way to put it.
yeah,
And I think that does happen in metros, maybe more than in rural areas, but like I'm no expert on the geographical breakdown.
yeah,
But I tend to work with New York area type people, but I've also worked with people in like the part of the country you're from, Bay Area. Like I think metros, there's much more of a business culture around youth sport. And so all of that sort of plays into kind of how people, interact in that environment.
yeah. Well, people definitely have to have the means to
Well,
support
that's also
that.
part of it,
Yeah,
precisely, right? They have the
yeah,
means to get the resources that they need. Like people, listen, like I'm not gonna, I'll be completely naive and I'd be, disingenuous if I didn't say it. Like, as much as I'd love to be able to serve, everybody I could, it's not mental performance coaching is not like it's a luxury item, right? Like,
yeah.
do I think everybody should have access
Uh,
to it? Sure,
Sounds great to me.
yeah, it sounds great, right? And they're definitely, in the world we live in, like, this is maybe a little bit of a tangent, but I think there's also a lot of a big push technology wise. There's like, venture wise, like out in the business world to try to make it more accessible through technology. But I think, and I love that. Like, I think that's great. But like for me, it's also like you may not be able to get the same thing when you have like a one-on-one
Oh,
trusting relationship, right?
yeah,
But
clearly
like
would.
I'd be remiss if I said, oh yeah, this is for everybody, and it may not be for everybody simply because the resources aren't there. We have to pick and choose how we prioritize where we put our investments, and that's okay, But I think it's important to know that the resources are out there.
Yeah, totally with you. I mean, I coach, I do life coaching, different type of
Mm-hmm.
coaching, and you have courses, I have courses, and we know the value of those courses at your own pace, uh,
Mm-hmm.
rate, and how that works. Things like meditation are great that you can do on
Yes.
your own, but they work far better if they're coupled with group coaching or some live
Yes.
element where you're actually getting that one-on-one focus. And technology will never be able to take that away unless there's some sort of AI avatar that can really get into your brain the same way a human being can.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that. I thought about that when I was in grad school as like trying to find a way to sort of replicate AI as like to like replicate the human. It's a really fascinating question. I don't think it's worth going into because we could go down a rabbit hole there's no answer for. But I think that AI element is definitely something that's interesting just because it's so prevalent now and everybody's so aware
Sure.
of it. But I just, if I had to say, like my opinion is it's really going to be hard to replicate human emotion, right? And that's required in coaching and understanding to get the most out of the process.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about the kids and what yeah, at one angle you got the kids who really want to do sports and they really are from
Mm-hmm.
very early age, whether the parents introduce, some sort of soccer or something at 3, like
Sure.
we did with our kids. They were out there
Yep.
trying to bumble around in the bushes. They're playing soccer, and then they carry that all the way through, and they know what they're doing, and they've got that passion. But then you've got other kids who are the parents want them to do some kind of sport either because they did it or they realize the value in terms of learning group dynamics and how
Mm.
to push yourself and all those things. What do you do with the kids who are they really don't have any interest where and the parents say, you you got to do lacrosse because that's the way to get you into that school that we want you to be in, or you've got to play soccer every season because we so strongly believe in the value that it imparts. And the kid is like, I don't like that, and I don't really want to do that. And maybe at the back of their mind thinks I really should be getting some sort of exercise, but it's not for me. Do you see that in your work, or those kind of people are you probably just more hear about them? You're not brought in to convince a kid to get into sports.
Yeah, I think I don't see that very much. And what I do, and I'll kind of get to that, but I think that happens at the younger levels, right? When kids
Mhm.
are like, in the sort of very young, 5, 6, 7,
Right.
8, parents do want to push their kids to just get out and be active and be part
Right.
of a team and do all this stuff. And I think that's good. I was always that way as a parent. My ex-wife and I were always, like, hey, you need to do something, right? But then at a certain age, as they got older, it was, I don't want to do this. And as they got to 10, 11, 12, it was like, okay, if you don't want to do this,
I'm not going to drive you
we're not
there.
going to, right. I'm not right. I'm not going to go to something you don't want to go to. And I don't want to force you to do it. Find something that that you like and you're motivated to go to. I think where I see it with families is not necessarily that idea that they got to keep pushing them. They push their kids to keep going to get to, like, say, college level and get a scholarship. I'm sure that exists. I don't see that a lot. What I do see, though, is kids who start to sort of like teeter on the edge of burnout after playing their sport for like 10, 11, 12 years. And the parents just don't want the kid to quit because they feel uncomfortable now, understanding there's a long-term consequence to that, right? Like,
Yeah.
yeah, if you quit today, you might feel better about it because you're unhappy with the circumstance, but are you going to regret that you didn't see this all the way through to the end? Right. And so that's where parents will come to me and say, like, hey, my kid's struggling. Like, we're at sort of this crossroads, right? Like, nobody wants to quit. The kid doesn't even want to quit, but
Right.
like they're really struggling with like the pressure or the stress of the environment, and they're really questioning, like, why am I doing this? That is a really big element of the work that I do, is like, hey, how do we find the reasons, that why, if you will, right, the purpose for doing this, so that when things aren't going the way you want them to, with your sport, you can continue to persevere because there's something bigger at the other end of the rainbow. And it's not necessarily an external reward, even. It could be just that, like, motivation that, hey, I worked through this and I saw it all the way through, and I was a character building exercise. Sometimes that's a hard sell, with a young person, but that is something I talk to them about. Like, hey, you can look in the mirror and say, like, I don't regret, that I don't like regret that I quit, or I don't regret that I didn't do this or I did that. And I think that does resonate. It's not always like foolproof, but I think they get it. And when it's framed that way, it also gives them a bit more autonomy, right? Like, that's a big driver and motivation, having the sense of perception of control. So if they feel like they're making those choices, even if it's like you give them the idea, but they feel like it's their idea, like anything else, now it's like, I'm making these decisions to keep going versus feeling like someone else is forcing me to do it. A
Yeah.
parent, a coach, the environment, what have you.
Well, it's such a difficult dance, and I failed at this so many times that I embarrassing to admit, about sports and music as well. These life skills that you feel like you really want to impart upon your kids. For me, growing up, I grew up in a single parent, single mom household, no dad around, other
Mhm.
no other consistent male figure that would have introduced me to basketball. And we moved constantly. So I was like 14, 15 different schools. So by the time basketball came up in academics, I'd already missed that. I'd already missed that course, and everybody's playing basketball. So consequently, I never learned how to play basketball. So I could never go out and just play with guys,
Yeah.
at a social event or whatever. And so that, for me, that was really important to get my son to do basketball and try to convince him how valuable that would be as a life skill. But he wasn't he wasn't getting it
Right.
at all. And you get into these battles, like, you really feel
Sure.
like this is so important. Likewise with music. Both my kids played played piano. We made them play, practice an hour a day, just like, because I didn't grow up with piano. I thought that was a really important life skill. And at some point, you have to let that go and realize what they want to do. But I guess my question to you about that is, do you see there's an age? I mean, maybe you're just referencing it, an age where you push and you push experiences on them, and some of these experiences you have to develop a little bit longer. You can't do piano for 8 weeks and say, oh, I gave it a try, I didn't like it. You have to work on it a lot longer than that. Likewise with a lot of other sports. But do you see there's an age there where that autonomy comes into play, and it's time for parents to wake up and say, this is now where I lay out the whole selection of sports and say, I'd really love you to do one of these, for your
Yeah.
own good, but I'm not going to force you into what my dreams are.
Yeah. I think, and I'll just speak from experience and give you an opinion because I don't think there's a scientific answer, but I think it's like around the 11, 12. kind of junior high age,
Early
right?
adolescence, pre-adolescence.
Yeah, the early adolescence where they're like the brains are
Pushing away
developing
anyway.
past they're getting a little more abstract, right? They're not as
Yeah.
concrete in their thinking.
Right.
Start to have opinions. They start to kind of see what they like, and they express interest in trying things. When that starts to happen, right? And if you can observe that as a parent, which isn't always hard, because like, listen, what you said is right on point, right? Like I've got 40, 50 years of experience in life. Like I've been through this. Like if you just listen to me, life would be way better. Except they're like, no, like I want to experience it for myself. I want to take the lumps in my head and I want to run my head into the wall a couple times. That I think is a really difficult skill for a parent. Like certainly one that I come up against as a coach, which is sometimes you got to let your kid kind of like go into the ditch, and that like you just don't want to do that. So to answer your question, yeah, I think it's early adolescence where they start to express their own interests, and you go, okay, if they have an opinion, let them follow their opinion versus you trying to change it.
Did you work with any parents who are who are wrestling with that type of parenting challenge and trying to figure out how to position all this stuff to their kids, or is maybe that's not really
Yeah,
where you come in?
no, it's something that I've considered and wrestled with as kind of like a standalone service, right? Like parent coaching. I think it would look differently, but I would say this is like with I would say with the vast majority of my clients, there's some level of informal coaching going on in that relationship. So the way I structure my coaching is most of the sessions are with the athlete alone. It is meant to be confidential, albeit, the parents are typically the ones paying. And so there's some engagement. But like I really try to make it so that it's a fluid process. It's not just, hey, your kid shows up on Monday at 12 o'clock or Monday at 4 o'clock, and that's it. Right. So if a parent comes to me and says, like, hey, I'm having an issue with my kid, can you listen to me? I'll listen to them, because I think that's what I find. I think most parents feel like they don't have somebody to listen to them either. Right. And so I get a lot of venting, which I like it. I'll sit and talk to a parent for an hour, just hear them out and, maybe give them my point of view or give them a suggestion. But then they feel like, okay, like whatever this has been kind of like what I've been bottled up with, like I can let that off my chest, and then they can go be a better parent. And I'm not like, that's not part of the coaching. That's just, I mean, it's part of the package, but it's not like I'm coaching them. Cause I think, listen, as a parent too, like even me knowing the value of coaching, just like you are, like you're a coach, like sometimes we just don't want to be coached, right? We don't want another adult to like try to like influence the way we're thinking. We want to just do it on our own versus like, oh, I can have a conversation with somebody and then I could just sort of take what I want from it. That's a lot easier pill to swallow than, hey, I need a coach to help me parent, which is maybe can even bring up feelings of like, I don't need this. Like, it's, yeah,
Well, yeah. Yeah. Well, in
yeah,
terms of my own offerings, I hope that nobody thinks when I try to say I coach dads that I'm going to give them advice. I mean, certainly if they
right.
ask me specifically,
That's a
what
really
did you
good
do
point.
in this situation, I would tell them what I did and give plus or minuses. But the whole value of coaching, and I imagine your coaching versus athletics coaching, where you're coaching specific techniques and strategies and stuff, is more open-ended questions, getting to what the root of the issue is, and
Yeah,
helping the
exactly.
person come to their
Oh,
own real
conclusion.
solutions rather than me saying, oh, tomorrow at 5 o'clock you're going to say XYZ and then this is going to happen, then you'll fix
Yeah.
it.
Yeah, that's you raise a great point, right? Because like I've been through my own coaching when I was in another line of work and I did executive coaching. I loved it
Hmm.
because of what you described, right? Where the idea was like I have someone guiding me and someone asking me the hard questions, but I have to go find my own solutions. And that's certainly the way I approach my coaching with athletes. And I think they like it a lot because of that, because they don't get a lot of people in their life saying,
Yeah.
hey,
Yeah. I'm not going to judge you. I'm going to, yeah, right.
right, I'm not going to judge you, and I'm going to plant a seed. I'm going to give you an idea, but I'm not going to tell you to go do it. Right. And if you do it, when you come back and it doesn't work out the way that you wanted to, or the way you thought I wanted to, I'm not going to judge you. We're going to learn from it. We're going to reflect, and we're going to figure out, does it work? Great. If it works, let's keep figuring out how do we progress it. And if it doesn't work, let's put it to the side and try something else. And
Yeah.
sometimes it might just be, we need to talk. A kid needs to talk to, hey, I need to get this off my chest. If I tell my mom or tell my dad, They just give me suggestions that
Yeah.
I don't want.
Yeah.
I just need someone to listen. And then they start to sort through those, like they get that stuff off their chest and they start to figure out stuff on their own, even without me saying, hey, go try this or go try that, or you should do this, or here's a suggestion. No, they're just like, oh, my head's clearer and I can think about things a bit differently. And that gives them a sense of autonomy again. They feel like they're in control of their experience versus I'm trying to make everybody happy or everybody's trying to tell me what to do. And I don't feel like I have any room to do something different.
Yeah. Of course, I've got a vested interest in this, but I think everybody should do more coaching, and
Yes.
certainly just an hour-long conversation with somebody like you in this particular realm where you know the right questions to answer would be great for any dad who's going through trying to struggle for. It's kind of an important thing,
Yes.
it's one of those building blocks of parenting that nobody teaches you how to do, and you're just in it at the moment, and you kind of, a lot of people struggle with either whether the kid's a great athlete and then suffering academically, or great academically but never leaving the house. All these different things are always there in the background, and parents need some place where they can talk about it without,
Yes.
like you say, somebody else who has a vested interest, like a partner, or
Yeah.
or the athletics director.
Yeah. And for me, it was, it's been private therapy, right? And it's been group support meetings,
Yeah.
right? Like-minded groups of people who are going through things that I struggle with, they're struggling with, the ability to identify and work through that stuff and talk about it openly without judgment. Like that stuff goes a long way because I think sometimes we feel like we've got to solve our own problems and it's up to us to do it. And then, something that kind of resonates from my experience, my past is, the mind that created the problem can't solve it. Right. Like I identify with that,
Yeah.
right? Like that, like overthinking and like, oh, like, and that, but I can solve this problem. How am I going to solve that problem if I'm caught up thinking about the wrong thing over and over and over again? I need some sort of perspective from somebody to say, no, you're thinking about it the wrong
Mhm.
way. You need to try something else.
Yeah, and maybe sports is a great area where there's a little bit less stigma. If you think you're going into talking about how to optimize your kids' opportunity, you can get a chance to have some real open conversations about what your conflicts are.
Precisely. Yeah. And I say this to parents all the time. I almost like, I describe it as a gateway, right? A
Right.
gateway to some sort of like maybe more global, talk therapy or talk counseling or coaching down the line because they feel really comfortable talking about stuff in the context of their sport. So now it doesn't feel so scary because we're talking about, oh, I want to get better. So I'm going to talk about this thing that's important to me so I can get better. Oh, I'm willing to do that versus, hey, I get parents who take their kids to therapy or counseling before they come to me. And the number one complaint I hear for a young person is the therapist can't relate or the counselor can't relate to the sports element of it. Right. And so the kids saying that, the kids are saying they don't relate. Right. But when they have somebody who can talk to them in their language about what is important to them, now all of a sudden they start to
Yeah.
open up. I get so many parents who say to me, my son or daughter is a person, a man or woman of few words, and then I get into a meeting with them and they don't stop talking, right? So like,
They need
yeah,
that.
they're that right. They're a person of few words with you because they maybe feel like they're being judged or like they feel like if they open their mouth, it's going to come back at them. And that's the nature of the parent-child relationship. It's not like it's the nature of my relationship. My kids know I'm in sports psychology. When I try to give them pointers about how they can approach their sport differently, it's like they look at me like I got 12 heads. Like, stop. I don't want
You're
your
doing your
advice.
thing. Yeah, you're
I'll
doing your thing
ask for
again.
I'll ask for advice when I want it. Otherwise just be a dad and keep your mouth shut. you know?
Well, it is an interesting thing that what you say is, like, at least in life coaching, we're always taught, you can coach anybody on anything because you're skilled in asking the questions and opening up the conversation and all those skills. But the fact that you have domain expertise, one, it gives you credentials, but like you say, the person who's doing, like you, if your child goes to talk to you, the terminology, the environment, all the container, all that stuff is in, versus if I tried
Mhm.
to do your job, I would have a vague idea, but I wouldn't have the vocabulary. I wouldn't know what the usual process was, expectations, all the rest.
Yeah.
So it's
Yeah.
great to have domain experience.
Yeah. And listen, I think sometimes you can, as a parent, have all that knowledge and it's still hard to
Yeah.
apply it because of the conditional nature of the relationship, right? Like you're a parent, I'm a kid. Like a lot of kids do internalize like the sports thing as if I don't perform well, it's going to have some impact on the relationship. Not necessarily the most extreme, like, oh, you don't love me, but I've heard kids say that.
Yeah, oh yeah,
Right.
yeah.
But like just
Still
that
happens.
idea of like, hey, I'm trying to fix you, and the kid perceive it as they're trying to fix me to so they can
Yeah.
get a better performer. Where parents don't mean for that to happen, but that's the way the kid perceives it. And then there's a communication gap. So what I find a lot of times too is like there's also self-selection from a parent standpoint where the parents say, hey, I'm coming to you, Mike, to help me because I know the limits. Like I've hit the limit of my ability as a parent and I can't help my child anymore because of this nature or complexity or just whatever like that's going on in this relationship. I need someone who's an objective third party to come in and inject something into the relationship that helps the kid. And I don't have to be the one to try to do it. And I think that's where most people parents who come to me come from that place of like, I'm kind of at my wit's end. I don't know what to do. Can you help me? And I
Yeah.
love to be that person. I love to be that person. Yeah, no, I do. I
I
think
bet. Yeah, it's great.
yeah,
Coaching is a lot of fun. I mean,
it
it's
is.
very, very satisfying and
Yeah.
I can
I
see
love it.
why.
It's my second career. So I have a much deeper appreciation for it, I think, just because of, having been in a corporate world for 20 years where I didn't get to do that. Like now I get to do this and I look at it every single day. Like, yeah, you know what? It's challenging in its own ways, but like the idea at the core of it, it's, hey, I'm helping some person or some family or some child have a better experience in their sport and like in their life. Like I can't really ask for anything more than that in terms of, what my work looks like.
Great. Well, it's been really fun talking to you about this. It bedeviled me as a parent. My kids are now 20 and 24, so I guess that they've developed their own sports angles that maybe were a long way away from what I was suggesting. Though they do both play tennis, which I guess is is a satisfaction for me. But if the kids were younger, I would definitely search out somebody like you now knowing that this type of coaching exists for at least an hour-long conversation, if not
Yeah.
more. So people can find you at michaelvhuber.com. We'll put that in the show notes. You do have a few the free course there, 5 mental building blocks course that talks about some of the things that we're talking about, the
Yes.
mental emotional part of things. And
Yes.
interestingly, you have another longer paid course that is about the transition from high school athlete to college athlete, and I'm sure there are just tons of challenges involved in that world that we don't unfortunately have time to get into. But
Yeah.
I would take a look at that if I had a high performing athlete child who has just gotten a scholarship somewhere, because
Yes.
that has got to be a crazy transition for a lot of kids.
It is.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So let's see. So was there anything else on the website that I should mention that is there that you
No,
can find everything on?
no, thank you for doing a great job. I mean, I think all my social media accounts are linked there. There are other free resources beyond the course that you mentioned. And there's just information about how to get in touch with me if you're ever interested,
Great.
in learning more about the process.
Okay, great. Michael, thanks a lot for joining me. You can find my
Thank you, Paul.
coaching services that are non-athletic, but a lot more about fatherhood and parenting at GreatDad.com/go. Okay, till you next time. Stay strong.